guys, welcome to That Going In Life. So today what I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you guys about some of my favorite Disney podcasts. So I know at this time of year that there's could be like a lot more driving going wrong, going to different shopping malls to check for like to get Christmas presents and then driving to people's houses and stuff like that. And personally, one of my favorite things to do when we are in the car, well, if I'm by myself, is to listen to a podcast. Also great for when you are wrapping presents. And so since I'm a Disney fan, I listen to Disney podcasts all the time. And I've actually been listening to Disney podcasts for close to 10 years, close if not 10 years now. So I have seen a lot of them come and go, and I just want to give you guys some of my current favorites. So when I list them, they're not necessarily in any sort of like ranking order, but they're all great for different reasons. Okay, so my first recommendation is a podcast called Mousetalgia, like nostalgia but with an M. This podcast has been going on for over 10 years now, and this one has a particular special place in my heart because I've been listening to it from almost since the beginning, and I've met with the host. So this has 4 hosts, a married couple, and then 2 other friends. And this podcast is really special to me because I've been listening it for so long. It was my first Disney podcast that I've ever found. It's continued, and it is one of the reasons why I met my husband. Eric and I met, which that story should be coming out soon, so there's a little teaser. It has to do with this podcast. The host, we have met them numerous times, and they are just like the most genuine. They're so nice. They're really, really kind, nice people. And a lot of what their podcast is it's very much focused on the history of Disney, specifically Disneyland. So that's another great point about this podcast is it's really, really focused on Disneyland. I find that a lot of other podcasts have more of a focus of Disney World, which is great, but Disneyland is my home park. So I would just say Disneyland and Disney history. And they do a lot of interviews. They're just, you could tell that they've been friends for a long time and that they know each other pretty well. Which is great because it just makes it easy to listen to. So Mousetalgia is my first one. The second one is jumping over to the other coast. This is called WDW Prep to Go. And the host, her name is Shannon Albert, and I've interacted with her a little bit on social media and stuff like that. And she also is such like a sweet, nice, genuine person from the interactions I've seen. I don't know her personally and I've never met her, but she seems really sweet. And this is a Walt Disney World podcast, and she runs a website. I believe it's called WDW Prep School, and it's very much like gives really practical, great advice for planning a Walt Disney World vacation. I'm currently planning a Walt Disney World vacation, and I've been really using her podcast and her website a lot for it's a lot of good help. So what this podcast is focused on is this is primarily a trip report podcast. So I think it's getting more frequent. It's almost every week. She is doing a long form style interview with people that have just recently gone to Walt Disney World. So this is like, I believe she generally tries to get the interview within a couple of days of them returning home. So she does a pre-trip interview, so kind of talking about their plans and their expectations, and then she does the post-trip interview, and it's very, very in-depth, and it's interesting to me because you really get to see how people's different personalities really goes into determining whether a trip is like successful, I don't know if that's the right word to say, but how well a trip goes, and also like different family sizes and all these things. So it's a really, if you're planning a Walt Disney World vacation, I can't recommend it higher. The next podcast that I would like to recommend to you guys, it is called Network 1901, and they have different series and different styles of podcasts in it, because it's like a little network. And what I like most about this podcast is it really seems to be looking at, it's marrying like a lot of psychology and Disney. So they're looking at how Disney kind of fits in with the larger world, which is really interesting. So I'll give you an example of one of their series that they did that I ate up. I could not wait for it to come out every single week. So what they did was they called it Disney Personalities, I believe it's called, or Disneyfied Personalities, and they went in and they really explained the Myers-Briggs personality type in regards to being a Disney fan, so what that type has to do with being a Disney fan, and then also trying to look for different examples of that personality type in different Disney characters. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a huge like personality psychology nerd. I love it. I love it. INFJ. That's what I am. But anyway, so if you aren't familiar with a lot of those aspects, then they go into detailed explanation, and they start off very simply, and then they get more and more in depth as the episode go on. So it's good for the beginners, and then it's also good for someone who's like me, who's been taking those quizzes and learning as much as I can for a while. So that's just one example. And they definitely tend to go into some more controversial issues. And personally, I do not agree with necessarily all of their opinions for some things, but I think the reason why I could recommend this so much is because so far from what I've listened to, they've handled delicate situations with a lot of respect. So they're not necessarily, from what I could tell, trying to like change your mind or start any sort of argument. A lot of any sort of controversial issues is very much, it's almost like a scholarly approach, or it's almost, they're not trying to shove anything down your throat is what I'm trying to say. And so I personally like that. I like having my ideas challenged necessarily, but in a respectful manner. Okay, so the next podcast I want to tell you about, it's called WDW Happy Place. So this is a husband and wife team. They are, well, they actually go all over. They do Disney cruises, they do Disney World, they do Disneyland. I believe they want to do Adventures by Disney one day. Who doesn't, right? And so anyway, so generally what their format is that they start off talking with some news, and then they have what they call a Tiki Talk, which is more like opinion-based and opinion-led topic. And I very, very much appreciate this podcast for a number of reasons. First of all, they are a couple that is probably, they're in like the next stage of life that Eric and I, they're one step up in the stage of life that Eric and I in. And they are a Christian couple, which is just like what we are, in that they love Disney. And so it's very encouraging to, particularly in the Tiki Talk, to just kind of hear them talk about their values and how it relates to their fandom. And well, they don't necessarily, they're just giving their opinion, but they're like a very uplifting, encouraging couple that just loves Disney, and I really appreciate what they're doing. Yeah, I would recommend them. Okay, so number 5, there's going to be a bonus, okay? So stick around. But number 5 is called Backside of Magic. So this is another primarily Walt Disney World podcast, but this podcast is very, very practical, particularly with saving money. So they kind of explain different ways you could save money. Like, they talk a lot about gift cards. They talk about a lot like using Southwest Airport points and stuff like that. And they give different tips on like getting all these different things. They're very much on like the practical side. Some of their techniques are not necessarily things that I would feel 100% comfortable with, but they're very, very smart, and their sense of humor, they're very dry sense of humor. And they also do kind of do trip reports, but it's not so much of like, oh, I ate this or did this, you know. It's more like practicalities. How do you get the most value out of your vacation? Yes, okay. So the bonus one that I'm going to recommend is, it's called The Story Geek. So the reason why I'm considering this a bonus episode is because they are not, or bonus podcast, is because they are not solely focused on Disney. So what they are doing is they are looking at stories. So it's definitely more based on movies than parks, and I'm more of a parks girl, but I do love the movies. And I love, love, love this podcast. It's typically they're very long, like I would say over an hour, which is great for when you are sewing. And what this podcast is it's very much looking at analyzing different movies. Like I think they call it nerd or geek movies. And it's wonderful because I was an English major, I was a literature major in college and for my undergrad. And one of the things that we did a lot was we would look at stories and we were analyzing them from different theoretical perspectives and just interpreting them in different ways. And I feel like I am almost listening to like a great English class about movies I love. And they really are looking to dig deeper in these things. They're looking for different themes, and it is great. And one thing that I really liked is, from some of these discussions that I've looked at, is they have changed my perspective about movies that I don't like. So for like, I have the weirdest taste in movies. Ask my husband, he'll tell you. I just have a weird taste in movies. And I have, more often than not, especially when coming out of a theater, I have a tendency of not liking movies when I first come out. And one such movie that I had problems with was Doctor Strange, which I love Marvel, like love, love, love Marvel. But Doctor Strange I had a hard time with to be honest, because of some of the spiritual aspects kind of made me feel like, I don't know about it. But I listened to the Story Geeks podcast about the spiritual aspects, and some, if not all of them, come from like a similar Christian background that I do, or a Christian background that I did. And so through that discussion, they made me take a second look at that movie, and now I could get a better appreciation for it. And it was really that their discussions are very thought out, they're very meaningful, and they're taking something that just seems like a summer blockbuster hit, like a lot of these Marvel movies are, and they really are showing how they can be having, how those movies can have different levels of morality or show different perspectives about the world. And so it's really interesting. Okay, that's it. I love podcasts so much. If you have any podcasts that you would recommend to me, please do, because I feel like I always get to like Friday, and then it's like, oh no, I'm running out of favorite podcasts. Disney podcasts, not Disney podcasts. Like, I love all the recommendations. So I would really appreciate it. And if you've checked any of these out, or if you love them, tell me what you think, because I want to know. Okay, thanks guys, bye.